The decline of Buddhism in India, the land of its birth, is one of history's most perplexing mysteries. How did a religion that once flourished across the Indian subcontinent, fostering intellectual, spiritual and cultural advancements, got uprooted from its place of origin? It requires us to delve into layers of history to understand the dynamics of power, culture and faith. Could Hindu kings like Pushyamitra Shunga, King Shashanka or the Islamic rulers have played pivotal roles in uprooting Buddhism? Or did the seeds of decline lie within the internal weaknesses and corruption that crept into Indian Buddhism during the Middle Ages? Was it due to persecution by Brahmanical forces? Was it the large-scale destruction of monasteries and massacres of Buddhist populations during Islamic invasions? To comprehend the erosion of Buddhism, we have tried to investigate the factors contributing to its decline and why other Indian religions, such as Hinduism and Jainism, survived the same adversities. This mystery, spanning centuries, deserves careful examination. Now let's delve into the demise of Buddhism in India. Let us first examine the internal factors. According to anthropologist Lars Fogelin, the decline of Buddhism in the Indian subcontinent was not a sudden cataclysm, but rather a prolonged, sorrowful journey over centuries, marked by complexity and conflict. Ancient texts, such as the Sri Lankan chronicles, Dipavamsa and Mahavamsa, alongside works by revered scholars like Vasumitra and Vinitadeva, tell us that Buddhism had morphed into a rich, vibrant landscape comprising 18 to 20 different schools. Yet within this diversity, voices clashed, beliefs conflicted, and an unsettling competition brewed as one school sought dominance over another. This internal strife was one of the initial cracks in Buddhism's once solid foundation. The first significant schism came in 300 BCE after the Second Buddhist Council held at Vaishali. It was a heart-wrenching moment for the community. The Sangha found itself torn asunder. On one side were the theravada, a small group of elder monks yearning for reform within the Vinaya, the rules that bound the monastic life. They were the passionate reformers seeking to evolve. Opposing them were the Mahasamgikas, the steadfast majority who clung to tradition, resisting any form of change. As dissent simmered, the Theravada itself splintered further into factions, the Sarvastivada, which thrived in north and northwestern India during the Kushan period, and the Vatsiputriya, which focused on the Pudgala, or body, rather than the soul. This fragmentation continued, with the Sarvastivada dividing regionally into schools like Vaibhasika of Kashmir, Satranika Darstantika of Bactria, and Mula Sarvastivada from Mathura. The Dharmarajika Stupa in Taxila, a remnant from the Kushan era, still bears testament to a time when Sarvastivada Buddhism flourished. The Third Buddhist Council in 250 BCE, convened by the great Emperor Ashoka in Pataliputra, further complicated matters. Amid the quest for unity, the Sarvastivada sect split again, giving rise to the Vibhajyavada school. This new branch emerged driven by different philosophical underpinnings. If Sarvastivada held that all dharmas or principles were important, the Vibhajas argued that only the present mattered. These differences might seem abstract, but they reflected deep emotional rifts within the community. The Vibhajyavada faction further divided into 4 distinct schools: Mahisasaka, Dharmaguptaka, Kasyapaya and Tamraparniya Theravada. Each ventured into different regions, finding homes in northwestern India, Afghanistan and Sri Lanka, propelled by Ashoka's dedicated missionaries who carried the teachings far and wide. As we move forward, the landscape of Buddhism saw the emergence of Mahayana and Vajrayana, these new schools capturing the hearts and minds of many. Mahayana Buddhism elevated the Buddha to a supreme being, diverging dramatically from Hinayana Theravada Buddhism and overshadowing the ancient Mahasamgika tradition. Vajrayana, on the other hand, emerged from the mystical streams of Tantricism in northern and eastern India, offering new spiritual pathways and replacing the former rigidity of Sarvastivada. Yet, with these shifts came an unsettling decline for certain schools. Sarvastivada faltered, losing its patrons and finding itself alienated by its reliance on the Sanskrit language, which felt distant and inaccessible to the common people. It was a painful retreat, replaced by the more accessible Vajrayana. The other schools in the north faced their insights darkened further, tragically diminished by the brutal Islamic invasions that swept through, tragically erasing much of what had been built. Thus, the vibrant Buddhist tapestry began to shift dramatically. Theravada found refuge and sustenance in ancient Tamilakam and Burma, while Mahayana blossomed, replacing Mahasamgika and launching into regions across East and Southeast Asia. Vajrayana emerged like a phoenix, soaring toward Tibet, carving out its own sacred space in the face of adversity. The decline of early Buddhist schools was a slow and heartbreaking journey, marked by a profound loss of patronage and support. As Buddhism emphasized penance and asceticism, it began to falter during the reign of the Shunga rulers of Pataliputra, devout Hindus who turned away from the teachings of the Buddha. In South India, the Bhakti movement of the 7th and 8th centuries began to swell, breathing new life into Hindu traditions and pulling followers away from Buddhism. Tensions rose as different religions jostled for relevance, and the sight of beheaded Buddha statues in Tamil Nadu told a sombre tale of violence and conflict. In the north, the devout Shaivite rulers of Kashmir, like Jalauka, similarly elevated Shaivism over Buddhism, while the destructive forces of the Huns and Scythians further drained its vitality. As the Pudgalavada school in Gujarat fell, it was enveloped by Shaivism, further diminishing Buddhism's presence. Ultimately, only a few major schools remained in the subcontinent. Mahayana persisted in Bengal and Bihar, Theravada found refuge in Burma and Sri Lanka, and Vajrayana journeyed toward Tibet. According to Randall Collins, Buddhism was already declining in India before the 12th century. In the 13th century, states Craig Lockhart, Buddhist monks in India, escaped to Tibet to escape Islamic persecution. Among them was Sariputra, the last abbot of the Bodh Gaya Mahavihara in Bihar, who remained active into the 1400s. His spirit of adventure took him beyond India's borders, embarking on a profound journey to Tibet and China, where his legacy would intertwine with new cultures. Another significant figure was Dhyanabhadra, whose early education under the esteemed scholars of Nalanda shaped him before he set off in the early 1300s to explore China and Korea. Their quests were not just about travelling, they were driven by a deep desire to share knowledge and nurture the Buddhist teachings that had shaped their lives. As these scholars ventured forth, others chose to flee south, seeking refuge and solace away from the changing tides in India. Even after the 14th century, the presence of Buddhists was far from extinguished. The Tibetan scholar Taranatha, who lived from 1575 to 1634, played a crucial role in documenting this ongoing legacy. His accounts shine a light on the Buddhist Sangha that endured in regions such as Konkana, Kalinga, Mewar, Chittor, Abu, Saurashtra, the Vindhya Mountains, Ratnagiri and Karnataka. Number 2 in the internal factors that contributed in the decline was moral and ethical degradation of Sangha. There were ample pieces of evidence to prove that all was not well in the monasteries and Sangha. Many people joined the Sangha simply because they did not want to take responsibility for running a household or simply wanted to live without doing any kind of work. Although Buddha had declared that robbers, thieves and jailbreakers cannot become members of Sangha, admission into Sangha was not a watertight system, and many of the undesirable elements found refuge in the monasteries. Number 3 was decline of urbanization. Buddhism developed during the period of fast urbanization in India during the 6th and 5th centuries BC. The movement was supported by urban centers and groups associated with urban occupations like traders, bankers and artisans. With the decline of urbanization in India during the Middle Ages, Buddhism lost significant resources to sustain the movement. The majority of monasteries were abandoned, and only those monasteries could sustain themselves who had large land assets. Number can be the language barrier. Another important factor that contributed to the decline of Buddhism was language. Buddha always preached in the local language of northern plains, known as Prakrit. However, with time, local languages kept on changing and developing. After a few centuries, the language in which Buddha's teachings were qualified was no longer easy for the local population to understand. The priests had to translate his teachings into new local dialects. The challenge became even bigger when the priests started translating the teachings of Buddha into Sanskrit. The result was that only monks could read and understand the teachings. The lay disciples started getting more and more remote from the academic monks of the monasteries. Number 5. The final internal factors behind the decline of Buddhism in India was the lack of leadership and unity. The Buddhist community in India was divided into several sects, and there was no unified leadership to guide the community. The Buddhist community was also unable to respond to the challenges posed by the Islamic invasions and the Brahmanical forces. The lack of leadership and unity ultimately led to the decline and eventual disappearance of Buddhism from its place of origin. The fierce Saivite king Shashanka, the king of undivided Bengal, who ruled during the 7th century, is also held responsible for the decline of Buddhism in India. Persecution by Hindu kings. Pushyamitra Shunga, in particular, fervently promoted Hinduism, leaving Buddhism in the shadows, though his successors did construct a Buddhist stupa at Part-2, an act that felt like a fleeting echo of better days. He destroyed several Buddhist monasteries in Patliputra and Gaya of the Magadh region, and even destroyed the holy Mahabodhi tree of Bodh Gaya. The tragic reality intensified as invaders like the Huns swept through, ruthlessly destroying cherished Buddhist sites. Mihirakula, one of the most notorious, left a trail of devastation across Nalanda and parts of Taxila, erasing centuries of knowledge and devotion. He destroyed several monasteries and killed hundreds of monks in the Gandhara and Kashmir region. Even during the Gupta period, when Buddhism had some visibility alongside Vaishnavism and Shaivism, the shadow of decline loomed large. Harshavardhana attempted to champion Buddhism, yet soon after his reign, the slow erosion resumed. The rise of Brahmanical forces presented a twofold challenge to Buddhism: philosophical opposition and cultural assimilation. The hostility of Brahmanas, as noted by historian S.R. Goyal, also played a critical role in Buddhism's retreat. On one hand, there was a philosophical crusade by Shankaracharya and other prominent Brahmin scholars who believed in the supremacy of the Vedas. Philosophers like Adi Shankaracharya championed the supremacy of Vedic traditions, engaging in debates with Buddhist scholars and converting many to Hinduism. Shankaracharya defeated several prominent Buddhist philosophers, thereby gaining a large number of converts from Buddhism. Another significant development that had a very adverse impact on the growth of Buddhism, particularly in South India, was the growth of the Bhakti movement. Buddha was declared an avatar of Vishnu, blurring the distinctions between Buddhism and Hinduism. Unlike Jains, who resisted similar attempts, Buddhists largely failed, leading to a loss of identity. The Bhakti movement, coupled with the appropriation of Buddhist philosophies, deities and temples, gave a hard blow to Buddhism in South India. The defeat of Buddhist scholars at Kanchi proved to be especially devastating for Buddhism in South India. Kumara Albera ran campaigns against Buddhism and gained a large number of converts for his Mimamsa philosophy, which believed in the supremacy of Vedic philosophy. As Hinduism began to revive, it brought with it the resurgence of the caste system, a stark contrast to the egalitarian values that Buddhism upheld. Over time, as this hierarchy woven deeply into the culture, many turned back to the familiar embrace of Hindu traditions. Some historians argue that in Western India, during the early invasions of Arabs, the Hindu and Buddhist populations adopted an approach that was opposite to each other. As a result, they were affected in very different ways. Once the Arab conquest was complete in these regions, while most of the Hindu rulers and communities registered the invading Arabs, the majority of Buddhist urban trader communities in Western India collaborated with the invading Islamic forces. The Buddhist chiefs collaborated with the Arab invaders and also provided them essential supplies during their wars with Hindu kings. Islamic invasions were perhaps the most significant factor in the decline of Buddhism. In the year 1193, a pivotal moment unfolded in the region that once thrived with the teachings of Buddhism. Qutb-ud-Din Aibak, the founder of the Delhi Sultanate and the first Muslim ruler of India, made a haunting decision that would leave the northeastern territories, once the cradle of Buddhist culture, defenseless. The Mahabodhi temple, a sacred site of immense significance, fell victim to the brutality of invading forces, nearly reduced to ruins. One of Aibak's generals, Ikhtiar-uddin Muhammad bin Bakhtiar Khilji, would go on to etch his name into the annals of history as the first Muslim ruler of Bengal and Bihar. However, his legacy is marred by the devastation he wrought upon Magadha, where he ruthlessly destroyed the revered Buddhist shrines and institutions at Nalanda, Vikramasila, and Odantapuri. This onslaught marked loss of valuable scriptures and initiated a sorrowful decline in the practice of Buddhism across East India, as countless monuments that once echoed the glory of ancient Indian civilization crumbled under the weight of conflict. The Buddhist sanctuaries near Benares were not spared, leaving scars that would resonate through generations. The sorrow did not cease there. Tamerlane further perpetuated the cycle of destruction, targeting Buddhist establishments and raiding lands where Buddhism had flourished, leaving behind a trail of desolation. The Mughal Empire ushered in a new era, yet it too contributed to the decline of Buddhism. Reports tell of the destruction of numerous Hindu temples and Buddhist shrines, where sacred spaces were not only demolished but also transformed into mosques. Aurangzeb, a Mughal ruler whose actions dismantled Buddhist temples and monasteries, replacing them with structures that reflected the empire's religious hegemony. The destruction was so complete that Buddhism virtually disappeared from the Indo-Gangetic plains. Buddhism was swept out of India because it had no answer to the violence of Islam. Buddhist populations were either killed or forcibly converted to Islam. Unlike Hinduism, which had a strong social structure to resist conversions, Buddhism's monastic community was vulnerable to these attacks. The initial converts had converted only externally, while internally they kept on practicing their Buddhist beliefs and practices. However, the children and grandchildren of such converts were more genuine in adopting the faith. Under Islamic rule, Buddhists faced heavy taxation, including the jizya tax on non-Muslims. Economic pressures forced many Buddhist traders and artisans to convert to Islam, seeking relief from discriminatory policies. The trading-class Buddhists also had to pay double duty on trade of goods. Most of the Buddhist traders, artisans and bankers converted to Islam to avoid a multitude of taxes, and converting to Islam made better business sense in the discriminatory economic system of the new Arab rulers. The final chapter in Buddhism's decline unfolded in Bengal, where Sufi missionaries played a crucial role in assimilating the remaining Buddhist population into Islam. Sufi missionaries, through their economic and social influence, gradually converted the remaining Buddhist population. The process of acculturation was slow but irreversible, marking the final chapter in the decline of Buddhism in eastern India. During this era, Buddhism throughout the Asian world was affected by contact with Europeans and Christianity. The colonization of many traditionally Buddhist Asian countries by various European and Christian nations had a significant impact on Buddhism. As European nations began to dominate the political and social structures in countries which had, till then, supported Buddhism, Christianity began to compete with Buddhism. Its status and dominance began to weaken. Other factors also had a negative effect on Buddhism, including war, communism, the spread of capitalism, scientific development, and regional and national instability. The decline of Buddhism in India, its birthplace, is a complex phenomenon influenced by various social, political, and cultural factors over centuries. Internal divisions, competition with rising Hindu sects, and the patronage of Hindu kings played significant roles in this gradual fading. Additionally, the invasions and political changes in the medieval period further weakened its foundations. Despite its decline, Buddhism's philosophical tenets and practices have continued to resonate globally, leading to a revival in interest and practice in modern times. This historical trajectory serves as a reminder of the dynamic nature of religious traditions and their ability to evolve beyond their origins, ensuring that Buddhism remains a significant spiritual path for millions worldwide today. In our next video, we shall talk about the rise and fall of Buddhism in various countries. Thank you for staying with us. Please do like and subscribe the channel.